Alright, today we're talking about Slipknot. More specifically, their second album, Iowa. This right here is the heaviest album ever to top the Billboard charts. Now, that being said, you and I both know that Slipknot isn't a death metal band. But get this, what if I told you they secretly introduced death metal to millions of people? Literally, on Iowa, they truly brought death metal chops into the Billboard Top 200. And while death metal is usually hard for the average person to truly appreciate, Slipknot used it to shoot to super stardom. But that's just the tip of the iceberg with this album. The band members hated themselves, each other, and the world. Real life tragedies that inspired the opening and closing tracks, Corey Taylor literally mutilating himself in studio during recording, and addiction issues that would put Motley Crue to shame. Today we're gonna dive into how those issues fueled Slipknot to make the heaviest mainstream album ever and become the Metallica of this generation, all while using death metal to do it. By the way, I'm Kane Irvine. This is the heaviest show in the universe. I'm a former metal elitist, basement dweller, lifelong metalhead. Metal's all I do, all the time. I live for it. Let's dive in. By the year 2000, Slipknot had exploded from obscure Iowa metalheads to one of the biggest acts in metal. Their self-titled album was huge. This meant sky-high expectations from labels and themselves for a huge follow-up. Here's the thing, going from a dead-end job to super rock star, it's got its drawbacks. And it's those drawbacks that help Slipknot form Iowa into the album that it would become. So listen carefully. This right here is super important for later on in the video. These guys were suddenly separated from their families, bunkered up with 8 other dudes for months at a time on the road. And combined, their addiction issues would make Motley Crue blush. Quote, "There were days where I would wake up in someone else's house and I had no idea how I got there or how long I'd been there," adds Corey, who was drinking heavily and struggling with his voice as a result. "It was intense. The issues I was going through on Iowa were very selfish, very self-loathing, very self-isolating. I wasn't mature enough to deal with a lot of things that the band was going through, and I had issues with my contributions to the band. I felt like I was letting people down." This right here would ultimately cause a ton of friction in the band. Only one album into their careers. Think about it like this. Imagine you and all your friends suddenly made it big. You guys struck gold on a stock purchase and sold it at the peak for millions of dollars. You traveled the world endlessly for months on end, partying and buying anything you wanted, only to return home and be forced into a room with the same friends. And you're told that in order to keep going, you gotta find the next big stock to buy and sell. This would cause a lot of distress, and it would probably fracture your friendships. And you'd probably try to find ways of coping, like drugs, alcohol, sex. And that's exactly what happened here. Quote, "When we did Iowa, we hated each other. We hated the world. The world hated us," said Sean Crahan in an interview with Metal Sucks. "There was nothing happy about Iowa. All of a sudden, we were these metal stars, caught up in the lifestyle and the problems that came with that. A darkness set in at the beginning of Iowa that none of us quite recognized." In other words, the band was angry, depressed, and completely stressed out. I think what some people overlook is the jealousy and insecurity that started to surround the band at this time. How do you even begin to break down who earns what amongst 9 different dudes? Alright, Sid, just because you do scratchy sounds, you're earning this much. And Chris, you just smash trash cans on stage, you earn this much. Understandably, fights between members started to become pretty prevalent. Money, drugs, bitches, rock and roll. That was Slipknot after one album. Slipknot had effectively become a pressure cooker of emotion, and it was gonna blow. But here's the thing, that chaos and pain would be the key to their success. How so? Let's get into it. When a metal band finally blows up, we usually see a continued softening of their music in an attempt to be more accessible. Metallica, Megadeth, even a more modern example like Five Finger Death Punch. Man, those first few Five Finger Death Punch albums were bangers. Bands like the success, and they want to keep the gravy train rolling, but Slipknot was different. Iowa is not only way more brutal than their debut, it's the heaviest album ever to top the charts. And they used the brutal conduit of death metal to transmute the emotions that they were going through into something truly groundbreaking. They didn't want to be mainstream. They wanted to drag the mainstream to them. And I'm going to explain exactly how they did that. Before, I spoke about how pain and chaos made this album special. And right away, we get a full picture of exactly what I'm talking about. The opening track, 515, is a recording of the exact moments Sid Wilson found out about the passing of his grandfather. A complete emotional breakdown recorded to open this album. This would set up the trauma-soaked journey Slipknot was about to take us on. The absolute classic, People Equal Shit, is an ode to the world that was trying to control them, the world that was trying to tell them what to do, what to write, and the people that didn't help guide them into their superstardom. This is where we get the first hit of death metal that Slipknot would use to go platinum, which is a wild thing to say in general, but they absolutely did it. It really is Joey Jordison who sets this in motion. The riffing on this song is very nu metal-esque, not necessarily death metal. No, it's the drums that drive this into death metal's territory. Right away, you're force-fed blast beats from Joey's incredibly unique kit. It's so overpowering and brutal, and to have this be the lead in from the opener is pure genius. From the outset, you can feel the angst and chaos that Slipknot felt at the time, whether you're privy to the details or not. Think about it like this. In 2001, a bunch of teenagers buy this album and sit down to listen to it for the first time. They're into System of a Down, Limp Bizkit, Korn, the popular stuff at the time. Then they hear People Equal Shit and they can automatically relate it to how they feel in their lives. Angry at the control and lack of understanding that people have for them. And it's wrapped in this hint of death metal. The whole album pulls from the most brutal corners of metal. Disaster Piece and the Heretic Anthem are amazing examples of this. But I want to highlight the bridge from My Plague. This is a piece that would be right at home in any modern death metal track. But despite this, Slipknot used it in a Grammy-nominated single that would be used in the Resident Evil movie. Alright, so Slipknot is releasing low-key death metal shredders at a platinum-selling Grammy-nominated level. How the hell are they doing this? To truly understand this, we gotta dive into the core tenets of death metal for a quick second. Most death metal, if not all, is largely inaccessible to a vast majority of people. That's the nature of the music. It's what makes fans like you that much more special. You, my friend, you get it. But it's not just the instrumentation that makes it jarring and hard to digest for the average person. It's also the subject matter. It's almost entirely impossible to relate or connect with a vast majority of death metal content. 90% of it is about blood, murder, and Satan, but the instrumentation itself, the blast beats, the dense bass, the amazing writing, these things are an awesome form of catharsis for all sorts of emotion. What Slipknot did here is turn death metal into something relatable. They smuggled the visceral brutality of death metal into the mainstream by infusing it with their own personal trauma. Quote, "That's where the best stuff comes from. You gotta break yourself down before you can build something great," said Corey when thinking back on Iowa. And as if to back up his own words, Corey recorded the title track of this album covered in his own vomit, completely naked, cutting himself. Don't believe me? Just look it up. This is extreme music produced under extreme circumstance with extreme emotions. It's extreme metal in every sense of the word. By breaking themselves down into little pieces, physically, mentally, emotionally, Slipknot gave listeners something relatable lyrically to offset the brutality that may otherwise turn most people off. The Heretic Anthem is filled to the absolute brim with death metal influence, but you can't help but replay the ever-living fuck out of it over and over when it's all about going against the system that's pushing you to be something you don't want to be. What teenager can't relate to that? Hell, what adult can't relate to that? I'm 32 and I still feel the Heretic Anthem speaking to me at a personal level. Despite all this extremity in the sound, Iowa debuted at #1 in Canada, Scotland, and on the UK standard charts and UK metal charts, and #3 in the biggest, most mainstream market, America. Not even this album being released a week before 9/11 could halt its achievements. Slipknot and heavy music was blacklisted from airwaves in the aftermath. It was deemed too extreme and inappropriate for audiences during the time. And this was back in the day before Spotify or YouTube or Apple Music, if anyone actually listens to that, to bypass the radio station gatekeepers. But when the world was hurting, Slipknot connected with them. People were feeling the same way these guys felt inside, and they absolutely ate Iowa up. Slipknot delivered one of the heaviest albums ever made. And instead of alienating 70% of people, they forged an incredibly unique connection with all sorts of fans, all through the cathartic power that only extreme metal could provide. Upon its release, Iowa cemented Slipknot as the biggest metal band of the generation. Really, the only band to release something as heavy as Iowa and go multi-platinum is Metallica. Iowa is Slipknot's Ride the Lightning, a maturing, ruthless, evolutionary step in their music. One that cemented their unique sound, their uncompromising attitude. So many bands that came out in the 2000s and the 2010s took cues from this album. because Slipknot took a risk that told the industry and metal gatekeepers to go fuck themselves. Slipknot was going to play by their rules, release the music they wanted to release. This gave them immense credibility with their fans, and a creative freedom to express themselves, setting them up as the standard bearers for modern metal, even in 2025. Iowa isn't just an album, it's a legend. They took their trauma and made it completely transcendent. They cemented it in time for metalheads to connect with forever, making intense emotions like hate, anger, pain easily accessible and exceptionally relatable. And they used metal's most extreme conduits to do it. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this one, please check out my video on metal's most underrated guitarist of all time, Bill Steer. Or if you want another deep dive into how extreme metal helps us transmute our emotions, you can check out my video on Whitechapel's The Valley. As always, long live metal.